74,000 years ago, the sun did not rise over Sumatra. The air in the forest is hot, thick, and tastes of metal. A strange silence has fallen, broken only by the panicked squawks of birds bursting from the canopy, fleeing something they can't see, but can feel in their bones. The ground hums, a low, persistent drumbeat from deep within the earth. This isn't just a mountain on the horizon, it's a living, breathing entity. Its slopes are sweating steam, and fresh cracks, like jagged scars, spiderweb across its flanks. The trees bend as if in a phantom wind. The surface of the lake shivers, not from a breeze, but from a tremor that starts miles below. There's a faint taste of sulfur in every breath. Thousands of miles away, on a coast in what will one day be called South Asia, a small family of early humans wakes to a sky the color of a die-old bruise. A mother pulls her newborn closer, a primal instinct kicking in. An elder stands by the shore, his eyes scanning the horizon. The birds are wrong. The tide is wrong. He can't name the pattern, but he feels its wrongness in his marrow. His hand tightens on the wooden spear he has carried his entire life. In our time, a volcanologist kneels on the shore of Lake Toba. She carefully drills into the earth, pulling up a core sample, a layered history book written in sediment and ash. In a sterile lab across the world, a geneticist watches lines of code scroll across a screen, hunting for a bottleneck in the human story. A moment when our population dwindled to a thread in a dusty trench in Jwalapuram, India. An archaeologist's brush whispers across a stone tool, carefully unearthed from just beneath a pale, fine layer of volcanic ash. A calling card left by an ancient catastrophe. This is the story of the Toba. We have no written records from those who witnessed it. No one survived to paint its image on a cave wall. Our only witnesses are the ash beds that span continents, the chemical signatures trapped in ancient ice, and the faint echoes of survival encoded in our own DNA. The eruption, known as the youngest Toba, Tough, was one of the largest explosions in the planet's recent history, throwing thousands of cubic kilometers of rock and ash into the sky. Back then, the warnings were subtle, yet terrifying. The ground trembled more and more frequently. Hot springs that once soothed suddenly boiled over. Animals, with an instinct we've long since lost, abandoned their watering holes and fled. A high, keening whine hung in the air. A sound, with no apparent source. For generations, the monsoon rains had been a reliable rhythm of life, a promise of water and food. That promise is about to be broken. The camera of our imagination zooms in on the details, the human connection across millennia. We see the gnarled hands of the elder, gripping his spear, his knuckles white. We see the gloved fingers of a scientist in the 21st century, delicately lifting a microscopic shard of volcanic glass, a piece of the mountain itself, from a fielder. Two hands, separated by an unimaginable gulf of time, both touching the same world-altering event. Deep beneath the Sumatran forest, the pressure has reached its limit. A vast chamber of magma, larger than any modern city, groans under the strain. A crack, infinitesimally small at first, forms in the chamber's roof. It races through the rock like a bolt of lightning, branching and shattering everything in its path. Above, for one final, heart-stopping moment, everything goes still. The birds fall silent. The ground stops humming. The world holds its breath. Then, with a force that defies comprehension, the first jet of superheated gas and ash punches a hole through the sky. The morning light doesn't fade. It's extinguished, as if a giant hand is pinching the sun shut. The magma chamber, a colossal bubble of molten rock and trapped gas deep beneath the Earth's crust, has been breached. 4 kilometers around, the ground heaves. But this is just the prelude. The real event begins now. Deep underground, the pressure release is catastrophic. The magma decompresses so violently that dissolved gases, water vapor, carbon dioxide, sulfur flash into a furious foam. It's like shaking a soda bottle the size of a mountain and ripping the cap off. This incandescent froth, lighter now than the rock around it, has only one way to go. Up. It punches through the crust with unimaginable force, a column of fire and rock roaring into the sky. It doesn't just enter the atmosphere, it obliterates it, climbing 40, then 50 kilometers high, deep into the stratosphere. At its peak, the colossal pillar of ash and gas expands, a monstrous, gray cauliflower cloud spreading out like a dark continent. Then, under its own immense weight, it begins to shed. An avalanche of ash, a continent of snow, starts to fall back to Earth. For those near Toba, there is no escape. The eruption column, too dense to support its own height, collapses. Ground-hugging, incandescent avalanches pyroclastic density. Currents race outwards at hundreds of kilometers per hour. They are not merely hot, they are a physical wall of superheated gas, ash, and pumice, erasing everything. Valleys are filled, forests are vaporized, and the very landscape is welded into a new, seamless blanket of smoldering tuff. The air ripples with heat, and the thunder isn't intermittent, it is a continuous, deafening roar that vibrates through your bones. Thousands of kilometers away, across the Bay of Bengal, the sky is turning sickly yellow. In what will one day be India, a fine, soft dust begins to settle. At first, it's a curiosity. Then it becomes a stinging sleet of tiny glass-like shards. It coats every leaf, turning the lush green landscape a uniformed gray. It gets in your eyes, your throat. The first coughs ripple through the small band of hunter-gatherers. The dust turns to a gritty paste on their damp skin. Animals become confused, milling in circles, their instincts screaming that something is profoundly wrong. The streams and waterholes are turning to gray sludge. A child, shivering not from cold, but from shock, licks the strange powder from her hand, thinking it's a new kind of snow. The leader of the group makes a decision. They cannot stay. They must move. Now, further west, on the coast of Africa, the ash has not yet arrived, but the world is changing. At noon, a strange, persistent twilight blankets the shoreline. The sun is a dim, coppery disk behind a thickening haze that smudges the horizon. Fisherfolk gathered by their canoes, debating the angry red color of the sea and the odd stillness in the air. The elders look to the sky, recalling stories from their own childhoods of strange sunsets and years of cold that followed a distant fire mountain. They feel a primal fear, a sense that the world's engine is somehow broken. What they don't know is the chemical assault happening in the stratosphere. The Toba Eruption is injecting hundreds of megatons of sulfur dioxide into the upper atmosphere. There, it reacts with water to form a vast, reflective veil of sulfate aerosol. This veil is wrapping itself around the planet, blocking the sun's rays, a planetary sunshade that will trigger a sudden and dramatic cooling. The ash from this single event will eventually be found from the South China Sea to the shores of East Africa, in India. The deposits will range from a few centimeters to several meters. The sterile layer burying the world that was back at the vent. The eruption intensifies. The friction of billions of particles grinding against each other in the rising column generates immense static electricity. Jagged forks of volcanic lightning illuminate the roiling cloud from within, turning it into a flickering, strubbing nightmare. The ground rolls in long, nauseating waves as the magma chamber below continues to empty. A low-frequency hum presses in on you, a pressure you feel in your chest, a note of pure planetary power. Then, a sudden, terrifying shift. The main eruption column, which has been a steady pillar for hours, seems to falter. It flickers. For a moment, it looks as though it might be weakening, but it's not dying. It's collapsing. The immense cloud of ash and gas loses its upward momentum and begins to fall back on itself, triggering another, even more ferocious pyroclastic surge. A wall of incandescent air and stone accelerates outward once more, and in the distance, through the deafening roar, a new fissure tears open the earth. A second vent begins to scream. The ground gives a final, shuddering lurch. The colossal column of ash and rock, miles high, loses its fight with gravity. It collapses back on itself, not as a single event, but as a series of monstrous pulses. The eruption has become a machine, a relentless engine of planetary change, feeding itself in a terrifying cycle. Kilometers away, in the uplands of what we now call Sumatra, midday has become a suffocating midnight. The air is so thick with superheated particles that forests are combusting without flame, the wood simply turning to charcoal. A herd of elephants, massive and usually so commanding, stumbles blindly through the gloom. Their desperate, trumpeting calls are muffled by the falling grit, their eyes rimmed with gray dust as their trunks grope helplessly for a single breath of clean air. This isn't just a human story. It's a planetary catastrophe, and life everywhere is paying the price. Thousands of miles to the northwest, a small band of our ancestors is trying to cross a river, but it's not water anymore. It's a thick, flowing slurry of mud and ash, like wet cement. They've improvised, tying wet plant fibers over their mouths and noses, a desperate filter against the choking air. A young hunter, his silhouette barely visible, turns back. He dropped his fire-starting driller tool more precious than any jewel. For a terrifying moment, the swirling brownout swallows him. He finds the drill, but nearly loses his family, his world, in the process. A small, knotted cord on his wrist is a silent testament to the bonds that are being tested to their absolute limit. Back in the present day, a geneticist points to a graph on a screen. The line represents human genetic diversity over millennia, and right there, somewhere between 80 and 50,000 years ago, the line constricts dramatically. It's a genetic bottleneck. This, she explains, is what a near-extinction event looks like in our DNA. Some scientists point directly at Toba, arguing its volcanic winter squeezed humanity through this tiny genetic window. Others are more cautious, suggesting it was a combination of many regional pressures, a perfect storm of climate change and migration challenges. The data is clear, but the story it tells is still a mystery we're trying to solve. What was happening geologically? As the immense magma chamber beneath Toba emptied, the roof above it began to fail. Blocks of crust, kilometers wide, started subsiding. This wasn't a neat, central vent anymore. The eruption was now tearing itself open, creating new vents along the collapsing rim, each one spewing tons of superheated material every second. The finest particles, carried in what are called coagnumeride plumas, were so light they rode the explosion's energy high into the stratosphere, destined to cross oceans. These weren't just inert particles. They included sulfur compounds that formed a vast veil of sulfate aerosols, wrapping the planet. This veil acted like a global sunshade, reflecting sunlight back into space and dramatically cooling the earth. The consequences rippled outward. In the Levant and Arabia, the life-giving seasonal rains began to falter. In East Africa, the Great Lakes receded, and the vibrant grasslands dulled to a uniform ashen gray. But the devastation wasn't absolute. Pockets of refuge, or refugia, emerged. Along coastlines and in dense wetlands, life clung on. For our migrating band, a choice must be made. The interior is a wasteland. The coast, however. The coast might be different. An elder, her face a mask of ash and resolve, points towards the unseen sea. Fish and shellfish, if the tides still worked, if the sea itself hadn't turned against them, there would be food. It was a gamble, but it was their only one. She votes for the tide. Then, after hours of unrelenting thunder, an eerie silence descends. The world doesn't go quiet, but the roaring artillery of the eruption falls away. Ash still sifts from the sky like a gentle, terminal snowfall. The air is impossibly still. The world holds its breath. And then it begins. A low, resonant groan, not from the air, but from the very rock beneath their feet. It's a sound that feels continent deep. The caldera is giving way. The world holds its breath. The initial, continent-shattering roar has faded, replaced by an eerie, humming silence. It's the quiet before the final act, the deep intake of air before the earth itself collapses. Then it begins. Not with another explosion, but with a groan that travels through the bedrock, a sound felt more than heard. The roof of the planet is giving way. With a catastrophic series of fractures, the ground above the emptied magma chamber fails. An area 100 kilometers long and 30 wide doesn't just sink, it drops. It's the Earth's ceiling caving in. The shockwave isn't a blast, but a rolling wave across the landscape, like a giant throwing a rug. Entire hillsides slump into the growing abyss. Rivers, confused by the sudden tilt of the world, hesitate, then reverse their flow, rushing backward into the gaping maw. This catastrophic collapse is a feedback loop. As the roof caves in, the pressure on the remaining magma below is violently released, triggering one last, monumental spike in the eruption, a final, furious gasp from the dying volcano. Where the serene Lake Toba will one day rest, there is now only a smoking, raw, and immeasurable wound in the planet's crust. High above, the stratosphere is no longer a blue canopy but a poisoned veil. The sheer volume of sulfur dioxide and ash has created a global shroud that fundamentally changes how sunlight reaches the Earth. Days lose their brilliance, dimming into a perpetual, hazy twilight. Sunsets are no longer golden but are bruised and bloody spectacles, painting the ash-filled sky in unsettling shades of crimson and violet. This isn't just a change in color. It's a sign that the world is getting colder. For the small bands of humans clinging to survival, this new reality is brutal. On the coast of South Asia, one group finally reaches the tide line. The sea itself is strangely calm, a placid gray under a sky that is anything but. They are pioneers of a new, harsh world. They learn to dig for shellfish in the ash-laden sand and cook them over embers painstakingly shielded from the damp. Heavy, sleep is no longer a right but a duty, taken in shifts to ensure the precious fire, their only source of warmth and cooked food, never dies. Further inland, the struggle is even more desperate. Without the fallback of the coast, other groups face a world of failed hunts and poisoned waterholes. The ash has choked the life from the land. One band, gaunt and weary, follows a dry riverbed to one of the last known springs, only to find another group already there. The air crackles with tension. Spears are held a little tighter. But this isn't a moment for battle. Scarcity has rewritten the ancient rules of conflict. In a world with so little, fighting to the death means extinction for everyone. Instead, a silent, tense negotiation begins. A carefully knapped stone blade is offered. In return, a piece of dried, stringy meat is given. It's not an alliance, but a transaction born of mutual desperation. The instinct to survive is now stronger than the instinct to conquer. The evidence of their struggle is scattered across millennia, waiting for us to find it. Ice cores drilled from the Greenland and Antarctic ice sheets show a distinct spike in sulfate levels around. 74,000 years ago, a chemical fingerprint of a massive volcanic eruption. Microscopic shards of Toba's ash have been found thousands of kilometers away. From the South China Sea to the Arabian Peninsula, a testament to the eruption's colossal scale. Climate models, based on these proxies, suggest years of colder global temperatures and severely disrupted monsoon cycles, leading to widespread drought and famine. While scientists still debate the exact degree of cooling and how long the volcanic winter lasted, the archaeological record is clear. For the people on the ground, the hardship was immediate and unmistakable. Now, the final convulsions of the eruption fade. The deep, planetary rumbles that have been the world's only soundtrack for weeks recede, like a giant's heartbeat slowing to a stop. A new, profound silence descends, heavier and more terrifying than the noise it replaced. The ash, which had swirled in the sky for so long, begins its final, Hentley descent, blanketing everything in a thick, gray layer like a terminal snowfall. The first true morning of the long dark arrives. It's colder than anyone has ever known. A child, huddled with their family in a makeshift shelter, exhales. A small, white plume of breath hangs in the frigid air, a fleeting ghost of warmth in a world plunging into ice. The world did not end in fire. It ended in silence. The great roar of Toba faded, replaced by the quiet, creeping cold of a volcanic winter. A gray sun hung in a hazy sky, its light too weak to warm the frost-laced ash. Blanketing the ground, the birds were gone. The loudest sound was the absence of sound itself, a profound quiet that settled over a wounded planet. This was the world after Toba. For those who survived the initial blast, the real test had just begun. Scarcity was the new god, and survival its only prayer. Along the coastlines of Africa and India, small bands of humans clung to the edge of the sea. It became their refuge, their last hope. The shell middens, piles of discarded shells, grew larger by the day. Seaweed, once ignored, was now a staple. Elders, their faces etched with the memory of a warmer world, taught children how to find limpets by touch in the dark, frigid water. Here, success wasn't measured in territory or power, but in the sound of a newborn's cry, a fragile note of defiance against the suffocating silence. Far inland, other groups followed the lifelines of dying rivers, trekking toward deltas and mangrove swamps, their own pockets of sanctuary. The journey was brutal. Not everyone made it. Their absence was marked not by grand monuments, but by the small, intimate artifacts of a life cut short. A digging stick left behind, a hundax dropped in the mud, a small hearth, half buried in silt, its last embers extinguished thousands of years ago. The sheer scale of the eruption is difficult to comprehend. Scientists estimate that Toba ejected over 1,000 cubic kilometers of magma. The ash, thousands of cubic kilometers of it, buried South and Southeast Asia under a thick, gray blanket. But the most devastating impact came from the sulfate aerosols blasted into the stratosphere. They formed a veil that dimmed the sun, plunging the planet into a volcanic winter that may have lasted 4 years. Ebene, decade. For a long time, we believed this event pushed humanity to the brink of extinction. Some genetic studies point to a population bottleneck around this time, suggesting our ancestors were reduced to just a few thousand breeding individuals. It's a compelling, terrifying story. But the truth, as is often the case, might be more complex. Other evidence suggests multiple, overlapping bottlenecks and signs of incredible resilience. In places like Jualapuram in India, stone-tooled traditions continue uninterrupted, found both below and directly above the Toba ash layer. Our ancestors didn't just survive. In some places, they endured. Today, where the mountain once stood, lies Lake Toba. It fills the collapsed caldera, 100 kilometers long. A vast water-blue scar on the face of the earth, easily visible from space. The eruption was a planetary reset button. Ecosystems were rearranged, species shifted their ranges, and the very climate was altered. The human groups that found those coastal and riverine refugia became the cultural bridges of our species. They passed down vital knowledge: how to read the tides, which tools to make, and the routes that would, one day, guide our species out of Africa and across the globe. The story comes full circle in the quiet hum of a modern laboratory. Scientists in white coats analyze ice cores and sediment layers, their labels carefully documenting the tale of the ash. They sequence ancient DNA and map the dots of tephra that connect continents. Their language is measured, precise, but in their eyes, you see they are piecing together the story of our greatest escape. Imagine a child from one of those coastal bands, now grown. She stands on a shore, watching a blood-red sunset over a calm sea. The world is different, scarred, but it is alive, and as the first stars appear in the glass-dark sky, a quiet truth settles. We are here. We are here because someone, 74,000 years ago, learned to read a wounded world and found a way to live within it. Disasters don't end when the noise fades. They remake climates, roots, and the very shape of our stories. To hear more true stories of survival that shook the world, make sure to subscribe and join us for our next journey into the past. Thank you for watching.